The WWC, what the world is watching.
Before the battle even began, Server 96 had already decided how this story would end. They made sure 118 saw it. But 96 wasn't facing one player. They were facing a server. 3 straight duel titles, 1 fight from 4. The talk was over. What happened next wasn't scripted. This is the actual battle. Before the first point was scored, the fight had already begun. Positioning would decide who reached the objectives first, and the beginning of any war isn't fought only by the strongest players. Engineers planting their flags play a crucial role. We join those engineers already hard at work. Then the clock hit 0. Positioning was over. The Warzone Duel had officially begun. Server 96 split their 3 VIP 18s to cover the battlefield. Stickman sent his squads from the southeast cannon. Abria came down from the north, and their 3rd VIP 18, Stones, positioned to the southwest, focused on creating chaos instead of attacking the capital. 96 punched first, and they punched hard. It didn't take long for the first warning signs to appear. 96 had already opened a 6-point lead, and 118 was being forced to chase. Not an ideal position against a force as strong as 96. UXW was beginning to lose control of the cannons. Squads were scrambling toward the capital, while 96 continued executing its game plan. Right now, 96 was dictating the fight. A minute later, the gap had grown again, this time to 10. 118's score had barely moved. 96 wasn't just winning the opening anymore. They were beginning to control it. And before UXW could even catch their breath, the lead had grown to 16 points. 118 was in one of the biggest battles in its server's history, and they were struggling. The early push was overwhelming, and 96 was doing what they normally do in a Warzone duel. They weren't just beating 118, they were imposing their will. The question was no longer whether 118 would fall behind. The question was whether they could survive long enough to fight their way back. And 96's early control wasn't just about positioning, they had the power to hold it. Stickman's first march alone was around 141 million strong, with multiple marches behind it well over 120 million. Abria brought overwhelming power of his own. That allowed 96's strongest players to anchor the capital, while the rest of the server rotated in behind them. 118 wasn't just trying to move the scoreboard, they were trying to move a wall. And now the situation had become critical. 96 had pushed the lead to nearly 21 points. The cannons were disappearing, the capital was under pressure, and everything on the scoreboard said this fight was getting away from 118. For a lot of servers, this is where the battlefield starts to empty out. Players look up at the scoreboard, decide the fight is over, and start leaving. 96 was used to seeing that happen. But 118 wasn't going anywhere. Although the story is usually told on the battlefield, it was what was happening behind the scenes that was beginning to matter. President Doberman had taken control of the communications and directed his team to get their situations under control. They had a game plan, and that meant everybody playing their part. Doberman was no longer concerned with the scoreboard. His focus was getting the server back to the battle plan. 1-18 couldn't erase a 20-point deficit in one move, but they could stop fighting the score and start fighting the war. And remember, Stones, 96's third VIP-18 was still working the southwest, creating chaos and forcing 118 bases to move. Early on, that strategy had worked, but look at where he isn't. While Stickman and Abria continued fighting for the capital, Stones still wasn't sending his power to the center. With 96 holding a massive lead, it probably didn't feel like they needed him there. Later, that decision would matter. And then, almost quietly, the scoreboard started moving the other way. Now the scoreboard was moving in the other direction, and 118 was already coming back. Stones was turning his attention toward the capital. The strategy had changed. The question was whether 96 had changed it soon enough. And this is where the story gets bigger than UXW. Across the battlefield, 118 was still there. RO, NOSS, RFA2, TKFM. Alliance after alliance kept sending marches, filling positions, and fighting for objectives. 96 had the bigger lead, but 118 still had its server. This comeback wasn't being carried by one alliance, it was being built by all of them. And 118 had another advantage hiding in plain sight. Before the battle, Doberman had told players to change their names. Across the battlefield, base after base now carried the same name, Commander. It didn't make anyone invisible. But in the middle of this chaos, identifying a target now required another step. Click the base, check the power, figure out who was actually there. Doberman wasn't trying to hide 118. He was making them harder to hunt. Nearly 21 points down, and now, for the first time in this battle, 118 was in front. But catching 96 was one thing. Now they had to keep them there. Remember when 118 was nearly 21 points down? 96 was used to watching servers disappear. Instead, look at the capital now. 100 of 100 positions filled, and 118 was stacking the fight with bodies. Stickman and Abria were still two of the strongest players on this battlefield, but raw power was running into something it couldn't simply overpower anymore. You can overpower a march. It's a lot harder to overpower a server. And while the fight for the capital was getting all the attention, another battle had never stopped. 118 had spent this war working behind 96, forcing ports, burning troops, draining resources, and making them fight on more than one front. Early on, 96's overwhelming power had built a nearly 21-point lead. But 118 had survived long enough to change the kind of war they were fighting. 96 had prepared for a battle. 118 had turned it into a war of attrition. This wasn't a comeback anymore. 118 had already taken the lead. Now they were doing something that seemed impossible just minutes earlier. They were starting to pull away. 96 still had the power. Stickman, Abria, and Stones were still on the battlefield, but the fight wasn't being played on 96's terms anymore. 118 had turned the tide, and 96 was the server being forced to chase. Now 96 faced a test that 118 knew very well. The deficit was growing, but there was still time, and 118 had already proven that a scoreboard like this could be overcome. Now it was 96's turn to decide whether they believed the same thing. But the roles had completely reversed. 118 wasn't reacting anymore, 96 was. Every reinforcement, every move toward the capital, every attempt to slow the score was now an answer to what 118 was doing. The window wasn't closing because of the clock. 118 was closing it. And then came a moment that perfectly captured how far this battle had turned. Stickman, the VIP-18 whose overwhelming power had helped anchor 96's early control, was still one of the strongest players on the field. But this was never going to be a story about UXW alone. This time it was NOSS making the move. Stickman was gone at the hands of the NOSS Alliance, and Server 118 was still coming. And then the scoreboard reached 21, the same mountain 118 had already climbed. Now 96 was standing at the bottom of it. By now, the scoreboard was no longer the story. The story was how it got here. 96 had the power, they had the early positioning, they controlled the cannons, controlled the capital, and built a lead that would have ended a lot of Warzone duels. But 118 survived long enough for everything else to matter. Leadership, participation, attrition, every alliance doing its job. 96 won the opening, 118 won the war. Three straight wins had brought 118 into this battle. But number 4 asked something different of them. Not whether they could dominate, whether they would stay together when they couldn't. They did. Different alliances, different players, one server. 96 had seen how powerful 118 could be. Today, they found out why 118 is built different. 4 straight.
QB18, out. Hey, you made it to the end. Thank you for taking the time to watch. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified when our next video drops, and continue the conversation with us over on our Discord. Proud member of Team UXW and Server 118. Congratulations to the team on winning Season 6.
Damn!